Of the Menlo Park Fire Protection District ordinance dated February 17, 2015 at 7:05. Roll call.
Director Ianson.
Here.
Director Colley.
Here.
Director Solano.
Here.
Director Carpenter.
Here.
Director Bernstein.
Present.
11-4.
Great. If we can all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Just to touch on whether or not there are any reportable actions from closed session, there were not. So we'll go to public comment number 2. Anyone from public comment? Okay. Closing public comment number 2. And now the Menlo Park Firefighters Benevolent Activities Report.
Good evening. We have our 2 upcoming benevolent acts for the association are going to be our Easter egg hunt on March 30th and the Rebuilding Together on April 27th. Those are both in process and being planned, so I'll have more to report on those as the committees get their teams together and choose, who's the benefit this year of the Rebuilding Together. And I'll have more for that later. The current undertaking that Local 2400 is participating in is the Honor Flight Network. This is a honor for veterans from World War II, the Korean War, and Vietnam. It recognizes them for their sacrifice and achievements. And the program, you select to apply to be a sponsor, and you accompany the veteran on a all-paid flight to Washington, D.C. to see the memorial. So that's the latest that our local is participating in. And their goal this year for 2015 is to fly at least 25,000 veterans. So it's a lofty goal, but there's a lot of participation and many other agencies, so it's something that we think we can reach. That's what I have for Benevolent Acts.
Okay, thank you.
Question.
Yes,
Easter
sir.
egg hunts at Burgess.
Yes, sir.
One comment. Kudos to you guys for stepping up for the honor flight. It's a
Thank
good
you.
organization. It's a good thing.
It is.
Any other comments? Okay, so we'll go to reports and requests. I'll just start with my president's report. I had a great meeting with the mayor of Atherton, Rick DeBoya. I'd never met him, so it was more of a social meeting. It was just so that I get to know him as the new president of the board. I'm just trying to meet with all the mayors and introduce myself to them. And I also had a great meeting with Menlo Park that we'll touch on item number 16. Thanks to Director Ianson and Chief Shackelhone for their participation and involvement. I thought it was a very positive meeting, and I know that the city thinks so too, so we'll touch on that a little more. That night, also on January 27th, Rex, Harold, and I attended the Menlo Park City Council meeting with Director Bernstein was there as well, where they decided to move forward with Station 6, so that was a positive as well. Also, just a reminder to everyone that the May meeting has been changed from, to May 21st, Thursday, instead of our normal third Tuesday of the month. So please make that, on the calendar. The May meeting is now May 21st, Thursday. And that's all I have. Rex?
So, reports. On the 22nd, I attended the San Francisco Creek JPA. I think there's some things that will affect us later on down the line as a fire district. They're getting ready to start the process out on the East Palo Alto Bay end of it. In order to do that, they have to move some gas lines. Right now, they don't have any permits but it's in the works with the Army Corps of Engineers. So that's gonna take place. One of the requests that we had was that when they started to do that, let us know as a fire district, because that will affect our response, because there'll be some roads closed out there. And it's pretty much it. It was, they're moving along. They aren't quite there yet, but it is something that's on their radar.
Great, Ron?
Yeah, I have just two things. On February 9th, I attended the groundbreaking for the homeless shelter at VA Hospital. Director Carpenter and Director Ryanson was there also. And then I attended the opening of the Ravenswood magazine over at Four Seasons, also with Director Carpenter. And I think the magazine is going to additionally give the residents of East Palo Alto a little bit more of an identity, kind of like what we have with the Almanac and with the Daily Post. So I was, and I met, I hadn't seen former Supervisor Rose Gibson for a while. She looks really good, so retirement must be agreeing with her. Beneficial. That's all I have for that. Thank you.
Yeah, we're sort of, I think, sort of combining reports from directors and liaison reports, and so I'll do the same. Mayor DeGolia of Atherton has started a weekly luncheon, and so I've been attending that, and it's interesting because the 3 times that I've attended it, it's been the mayor, the town manager, and myself. So, we had a lot of really good open discussions. It's been very helpful. And I also had breakfast with the police chief. And basically what I try to do is just maintain a lot of informal communications with these 3 individuals, so that I'm available for them if questions arise. Spent a lot of time with the mayor talking about the property tax issue, which is not well understood by the jurisdictions whose citizens we serve live in, because they perceive that somehow we get money from directly from those residences, and they don't realize it's part of a countywide pool. So that education process continues. And as indicated, also attended the groundbreaking at the VA and Ravenswood. And I don't know when you want to do it, whether you want to do it before the consent calendar or we get to the regular agenda, but I'd like to propose a reordering of the regular agenda items.
We can do it right before the consent.
Whenever you want me to do it.
Why don't we go finish through the
Okay.
director's reports and the committee reports, and then we'll go from there. Chuck?
Would you like me to address the finance committee one too, or separately?
I would do your any reports or requests first, and then we'll have Rex address the emergency type committee, and we can get your
Okay.
finance report.
Well, I have a request that I would like to make. I brought it up in another discussion, but as we're doing costs of labor contracts, I'd like to request that we look at how much these contracts would increase our actual costs, not just over the budget, because the way the budget has been done, and I hope as part of our review of, which I'll talk about in the finance committee, as part of our review of the budget, that we will budget in a new way in the future. But in the past, we've been budgeting using theoretical numbers. If everybody were at the maximum pay rate, what would the budget be? If all the positions were filled, what would the budget be, and so forth. So it gives us kind of an artificially high baseline, which makes the costing of increases less than it really is, because really we're dealing with how much it will increase our actual costs. And so anyway, I'd like to request that the people who are assisting us in that adjust for that. I think that adjustments would be relatively easy. I don't want to minimize it, but it's the differential is just simply the merit pay and the unfilled positions, and I think those are adjustments that could be done relatively easily. So I'd like to make that request.
In terms of, I too, by the way, Rob, was at the kickoff of Elle Ravenswood magazine, and I know you didn't see me there, but that was
Are you in a disguise?
I just want to kind of salute the effort that's going on there. It's a very, I think, heroic effort to start a publication in any environment, and to try to start what is a fairly literary magazine in East Palo Alto, I think is, and it's not just East Palo Alto, it's also East Menlo Park or Bellhaven, is a heroic effort, and I think the publisher should be commended. I say the publisher, apparently he's also the writer, the photographer, and for all I know, he delivers the papers as well. And I just want to wish them the best of luck, and I hope they can survive long enough to provide an outlet, a channel for communication in the community. And that's.
And one of the things I would pick up on is that, you know, I don't know whether, you know, how we satisfy our public noticing requirements in terms of publications, but I would certainly hope that we would use them as part of our public noticing mechanism, because they're reaching a community which is a really difficult community to reach.
That's a great idea.
In fact, it didn't, in the back of the magazine, it has all the elected officials. Firebird wasn't mentioned.
Well, we can have a quid pro quo.
But at the opening there, I had mentioned it to him, and he said it would be included next time.
Yeah, I found them very.
So they're really receptive.
Yeah.
I want to then ping pong back one more thing that Peter said. I'm a liaison also to East Palo Alto, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but I think the idea of using that as a communication channel is important. It is a very underserved community. I don't mean it in the traditional sense. I mean, it's one giant surf region, for example. It has an unknown number of volunteers. When the near flood occurred in December, nobody knew where to evacuate to, and there's just very little in the way of communication that is reliable. They still use the churches and the senior centers and the children, the gyms and things like that as communication tools. And I think to have something that serves the community is a terrific opportunity. So if we can advertise, I'm sure it would be very inexpensive to put our public notices there.
Liaison reports. I know that Peter gave his, but I'm not sure if Rex, did you want to touch on Menlo Park, or did you fulfill that in your?
No, actually, it's what we did on the 27th with Menlo Park is agenda item number 16 tonight. So it's just to let you know. We talked about special ordinances. We talked about the general plan and the M2. We talked about the service area, which is going to be affected, and the PF zoning for all of the stations, not just Station 6, but all of them, how we did that. But that's up for discussion on item 16 tonight, so we can expand on that.
Carlton County?
Yeah, on January 27th, I had spoken to Don Horsley and Lawrence Holton, who are our two supervisors that represent the district. And I had forwarded some information to the chief where there was one project that they were interested in, which was the smoke detectors with the old apartment buildings. And a lot of those affected, mostly Redwood City. I think there was maybe one or two that affected us. But, well, the chief has forwarded that to our fire marshal, and he's working on it. So they say we're all fine with the county. That's a good thing.
And Peter, you went 10th on average, and I'm sure you're going to keep up with those lunches between y'all, right?
Well, it's a very nice, what I really would like to note is that I think in council members here from Atherton tonight, you know, representing that community is very tough. You know, trying to get people from that community out and to participate in things. You know, people build their fences and close their gates, and you know, thank God we've got people who are prepared to run for city council and to do the hard work. And it's very frustrating. I tried very separately to organize in my very small neighborhood a little disaster exercise, and have gotten zero response from almost 100 people that I contacted just wanting to participate. And it's frustrating. And I really, I said to Rick, I really appreciate his willingness to do that, and hopefully over time, the rumor will get out that it's a good way to sit down and talk about issues, etc.
Keep up the good work here, because it is hard. East Palo Alto, you want to
I
add
have
anything
nothing,
else?
I have nothing to.
Okay, so then the committee reports, emergency prep committee, Rex?
Yeah, we met. It was kind of nice. The main thing we're looking at now is how do we, times have changed since the original district was split into 2 divisions. So we sit down with Chief Navarro, Chief Chappell-Hammond, and looked at a different way of doing it. And I think that we've decided what we think is right, but I think he has to take that back to his staff to make sure they agree with it. And once they do that, then our next step is to go and look at the CERT map and how it fits into interface with the fire district's division map. So that's in the process.
Chuck, do you have anything to add? You're on the committee.
Well, I want to add, I sort of had an epiphany at the Emergency Preparations Committee meeting where I realized that we're talking about different things in some ways, and emergency preparation at the district level is really not the same as what I've been thinking about, which was really at a volunteer level. And I think I want to start, which I intend to talk a little bit more later about, trying to make that distinction clear, because what the district needs to do in terms of emergency deals with FEMA, these sort of bureaucracies and so forth. And what people need to deal with is like their neighbors, and it's really just a different kind of thing entirely. And I thought we were having the same conversation when I was talking about emergencies, and I realized that we weren't having the same conversations, and I think it requires some clarification. I'm really interested, and I'd like our committee to also focus on community volunteers and community planning and the ability to self-mobilize without some sort of, hierarchical or paramilitary kind of organization. And so it was just one of those things where I thought we were talking about the same things, and we haven't been. And so I'm looking forward to doing that. And because I'm also involved with the City of East Palo Alto, I think they're really ready for that kind of thing too. And they actually have, contrary to Peter's description of Atherton, they actually have these sort of informal networks that are very powerful, with churches in particular and so forth. And I think it's possible that we can organize through pre-existing mechanisms. So,
Peter?
Yeah, Chief and members of the management team and I have had these discussions over many years. It's a very huge challenge to try to take a professional organization that consists of full-time people who train, who respond, who have a protocol, and then suddenly have another group of people who are volunteers over here and who operate very differently. And we went through a period of time, for example, when we were saying to the CERT people, well, if there's a disaster, report to the fire station. Well, guess what? If there's a disaster, there's not going to be anybody in the fire station. So it's a very strange place to send people. And so, much along the lines that Chuck was just discussing, I've been spending more and more of my time with my private citizen hat on. And it gets confusing sometimes when you say, are you doing this as a fire board member, are you doing this as a citizen? Trying to encourage neighborhoods to say, look, you have to take your responsibility for organizing yourself. And when something happens, you're going to have to take care of yourself, your family, your neighbors. And then using the CERT structure, then you can then pass messages which will eventually get to the firefighters who are out there strained to the limit because of the resources. And a really good example of one of the issues we're stumbling over is we are blessed, particularly in Atherton, with having a very good ham network. We got a lot of people who are ham operators who have a lot of discretionary money to spend on really good equipment. And so we have an absolutely bomb-proof communication system in the ham network. we have a very poor interface between the ham network and the department. And as I explored this, I discovered, among other things, it is illegal for a paid employee to use ham frequencies. Yeah, because it's amateur radio. And there's been a ruling by the FCC that says a paid employee, as part of their job, may not use the ham frequencies. Now, there's a little exception there for emergencies, which is frequently, which gives you a nice window. But I've been having a dialogue with the chief and saying, well, so what might we do? And one of the things that I suggested, and what the management does with it is theirs, is that we put a really good ham transceiver in the battalion chief's car, and until such time as a ham operator shows up, the battalion chief listens to what's going on the ham network, and we say to net control, every 10 minutes, every 15 minutes, just get a status report. And when a ham operator shows up at the BC's vehicle and says, hey, I'm a ham operator, it is properly identified as such, then it can become two-way communications, and then the battalion chief can say to the ham guy, hey, would you please ask about this, or give me a report on that. But they are two incredibly different organizations, and we for years have always been trying to organize it around the fire district. And as you point out, fire district's got a job. And the job is to take their limited resources they have and try to do the best they can. And under Steve and other people's leaderships, what we need to do is to create a ham structure, a search structure which is independent of that, but which has some recognized way of communication and some recognized way of mutual appreciation. So a firefighter who sees and identified CERT people has some confidence in what they're going to do. One of the things, for example, I met with the police chief of Atherton. He subsequently met with Harold about having a training course for traffic control. And the police departments have always been reluctant to use CERT people for that role because they say, traffic control, you have to be trained for. You can't just walk out in the middle of the street and start waving at people. Now, fortunately, FEMA has a really good syllabus for a 4-hour course. And the Atherton police chief said, yeah, we'll do it. And so but these are two very different things that we're trying to figure out how they dance together. And we're not going to make CERTs firefighters, and the firefighters are not going to have time to try to provide direction to CERTs. So, long story.
Can I just ask one more real quick point? The good news is the Emergency Prep Committee referred this to the whole board at the next meeting for a discussion.
Great. Okay.
Anything else, Rick? Anything else? Finance committee, Chuck, you and Peter?
We spent the meeting discussing our work plan. It primarily involved cleaning up some ways of dealing with some of the accounting issues, both dealing with the accounting issues, dealing with the reporting issues, and dealing with the budgeting issues in a way that gave better information to the board and gave better information to the public. So I'm not going to go into any more detail. Peter might want to elaborate or something, but I think we're going to hear next time from Kathy about what's feasible and in what order we should attack these things, and that's it.
And one of the things that's really been, Kathy really brings a lot to the table in terms of trying to help us pull the pieces together. What the Finance Committee spent a lot of time on was process. How do we get from here to a budget? How do we put a budget together which the average citizen can look at and make sense out of? And as Chuck remarked when he first showed up on the board and saw all these different pockets we were putting stuff in and moving stuff around, it is a bit confusing. So we're going to spend some time seeing whether or not we can improve the clarity for the purpose of both better management and better transparency.
That's going to help fix your charts of account issue that we've been bringing up.
Well, that's the key element of it, is, how do you organize, because right now we have all these little reserves and we have all these little things, and what we want to try to do is rationalize that so people can understand, okay, this is what's going on. I mean, I literally had one of the Menlo Park council members say to me, since you imposed upon us these draconian sprinkler regulations, and since you have such huge reserves, we think you should make grants to people who you're forcing to put sprinklers in. And my response was, well, that's interesting. East Palo Alto accepted a much more stringent requirement, and they didn't ask for any help. And I think they're much more disadvantaged than Menlo Park. But people look at our reserves and think it's like having money out there for which there is no commitment.
Because I got brought up in the Menlo Park City Council meeting too, when they were dealing with that ordinance.
They got off light compared to everybody else, and now they're begging poor.
Thanks. Thanks for that update, Peter and Chuck. Fire chief's report.
You have the report in your packet. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
I had sent you an email, and as I read through the fire code, and I got interested in doing this when we approved the Menlo Park one of the things that jumped out at me was the requirement for house signs. And as I walk around the neighborhoods, I find about 97% of the homes do not comply with the fire code requirement for house signage. You know, they have to be a certain size, they're supposed to be illuminated, there are all sorts of other things. And I would just like at a future meeting for some guidance as to whether that's something we intend to enforce or even inform people about. Atherton right now, for example, is doing a lot of work on their ordinances with respect to setbacks and signage and things like that. And if we want to focus on this issue, it's probably a good time to do it.
So
Atherton signs are particularly, they're all decorative, but irreadable.
John Johnson, I forwarded that to him. He's looking into what you had sent. So that's the fire marshal. So I'll be sure to report back once he
Okay, thank
calls
you.
me.
Chief, I have
Yes, sir.
a question on the Slack.
Yes.
I see that we're up for a 5-year agreement extension. I know in the past it had come up that Stanford was looking for bidders for fire services. And it says for a 5-year extension. Has there been any talk from the Slack about anything about incorporating Stanford with the Slack? Or has those talks gone any further, or is it just totally?
It's two separate items. So, the campus, Stanford campus versus the SLAC facility. They're not only the two different locations. One is in our county, which is SLAC, and the other one's in St. Clair County, but that has not come up. I know that in their discussions, that's part and parcel, though, to their negotiations, because in the old agreement, that was all tied together. So the economics of that, they'll have to deal with on the Stanford Palo Alto side. We've already done that, and you'll see that when the agreement comes back to you in March from SLAC. We've already dealt with that with a renewal with them, just for that facility. So there's been no expansion to the Stanford campus.
And has there been any additional buildings built on the facility?
On the SLAC
On the
facility?
Slack side? Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, they have huge capital projects going on right now where they've torn down buildings. The good news is they're tearing down old infrastructure which had problems with alarms and so forth. And the newer construction is fully sprinklered. They have their own fire marshal, they have their own safety engineers, and it's being engineered designed with current codes, so it'll have far fewer problems, and the ones they do have will probably be a legitimate problem versus a false alarm.
I saw in your last report that false alarms have gone down a bit there,
Yes.
which is a good thing.
Yeah.
And they're mostly handling them on their own end.
Their security forces are also, we just trained them, recertified them as EMTs. And so they're also, ahead of us when it comes to medicals. And you're right, they're also going out and checking an alarm, and we may get a cancellation route, but at least we don't have to respond all the way out.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do those items just include fire, or does that include hazardous materials also?
For the detection alarms,
No, for the SLAC facility.
so it would be, we have MSDS sheets, the whole 9 yards, that they manage themselves, but we work with them
on a monthly basis. Fire marshal was up there monthly in meetings with them if they change any of their processes and so forth, including, you know, what they're using for
I
hazardous.
guess I was wondering, are calls ever for hazardous materials?
Sometimes they're rare, but they do use some hazardous materials. But again, when we started this 3 years ago, we projected call volume, which currently is half of what was projected. So in the 3 years that we have institutional history with them, we've responded to about half of the expected emergencies that they anticipated.
And from their standpoint, they've cut their cost of fire service by 85%. They were really getting screwed.
And there was another consideration, is to position wildland fire equipment on their property, perhaps?
Yeah, not position it, but for us to have a patrol unit, which they had. Stanford and Slack owned the facility, that the fire station that was up there on site. When they received approval that they did not need to operate out of the facility any longer through a Tiger team, assessment team that was brought in, they asked us if we wanted the engine or the brush vehicle, and we did not find a need to have that at the time. So they sold those units. They've repurposed the station. We respond out of Station 4, which geographically is, you know, desirable, also off campus. But we've looked at it with the brush rig. We see a duality of purpose, which will be a cost increment for them in the next agreement, that they'll pay a portion of that. So that helps us buy the vehicle, helps us put it at Station 4 so we can do what we're currently doing in East Menlo with a brush rig out there as well, which will cross that. You're welcome.
Carol, okay, I have a couple questions, Carol. So
Sure.
for your modified duty item here,
Yes.
you said that there were some eligible members on workers' comp who are on the modified duty cover. How many are on that, on the program?
So currently we have, well, the number varies anywhere from 5 to 8 that's been on workers' comp. Currently we have one member who is eligible to come back as the first person to go on to modified duty. That individual subsequently in the last week has now come back to full duty. So it was on modified duty, I would say for 2 or 3 weeks. But it was a benefit to the district and to that individual. It's probably more of a benefit to individuals that are hurt off shift than on workers' comp. But, you know, it's a benefit, I think, to both sides. It was negotiated and worked out with the labor group. It was a meet and confer, and I think it's, you know, it was a good program in the past. It ran into some problems, that's why we quit using it. And with the help of labor, Jenny Esquivel and HR, we've surfaced it and polished it off, changed it a little bit. I think it's been a big benefit.
So right now, there's no one on modified duty?
Currently, there's no one. You have, there has to be criteria for
Right.
that in terms of what the doctor's willing to release,
Yeah.
as well as what's the job assignment. And so, you know, we're much more selective than we used to about just bringing people back. There has to be a reason for it, and it has to qualify under the doctor's limitations.
Okay, great, thanks. And then one last thing, in our meeting with the city of Menlo Park, I know that they brought up the contract renewal
Right.
with Warren, so is that in the works? I didn't see it in here, maybe.
Well, it's been in the works, and it was a renewal since the agreement said that we could renew within staff. We didn't need to take it to the board. However, subsequently, Menlo Park, as you know, has had more council influence on the agreement. We're going to need to take another look at it because there's significant changes that are being proposed. If we cost them out, it really is, in my opinion, too expensive of an agreement. But I think a lot of the services that they're requesting from the council standpoint are things that we would normally do at no cost, based upon they fall more within the CERT public education arena versus contracting for a service where we're actually doing city-based work, as Director Bernstein mentioned, that requires FEMA and state compliance, training, planning issues. I mean, it's more of a, it's not an agency-specific item anymore. It becomes more of a public benefit. And so we'll need to sort all that out. That just happened this last week, that they came back with a number of things that, it's not that they're bad. I'm not sure they belong in an agreement for services because those are at no cost to the district. Right? And then, excuse me, no cost to the city, or at least that's what I think.
And I would also say that, you know, we are for Menlo Park, Atherton, East Palo Alto, taking on a statutory responsibility which they have for CERT training. And we have chosen to do that because we think it's in the best interest of the fire district. I would never want that to be put into an agreement where we're doing it because we have to do it for the city. And so those are two separate issues, and to the degree that they try to conflate them, I agree with you, let's keep, if they want us to provide certain services and pay us for them, fine. But I don't want them to ever perceive that we have a contractual obligation to do CERT training. We do CERT training because we think it's in the best interest of the fire district.
Yeah, I would agree. And that's where this is going. Again, when I just looked at it the other day, and this is new, last week, it didn't make sense to me. I'm not sure, again, to Director Carpenter's point, needs to be in an agreement because, you know, we wouldn't want to charge for it, right? We shouldn't be charging for that. That's a shared responsibility that they also should be, you know, helping us with. And again, at no cost to either jurisdiction other than staff time and, you know, trying to benefit the overall community because it's the same people we serve that they serve. It should be more of a joint effort, I agree. But putting that within the scope of an agreement makes me nervous because I don't think it belongs there.
You know, we should not have a contractual obligation to do that.
Yeah.
We do it because we think we should, not because we have a contractual responsibility.
So it's morphed, and I'll have to talk more with, obviously,
Yeah.
the liaisons about that, because that's new. I had heard there were things that were coming, but, you know, it's kind of gotten bigger than I anticipated.
I want to make a comment on that, though. I mean, I'm the former liaison to Menlo Park, and it's my impression that what they're interested in is something that East Palo Alto is also interested in, and that several of us on the board are interested in, which is a major community preparedness effort. And so they're trying to find a way to ensure that they will get what they would like, that is
Sure.
leadership from the district on these matters. And I don't need to say more about it because we're going to discuss it in our next meeting. But I think part of the reason for doing this is because they're frustrated. Some council members thought they were getting something other than what they got during the past year.
Right.
They're not unhappy with what they got, but it wasn't what they thought they were getting.
And that, you know, you said it earlier when you realized there's two or multiple layers, you know, on the governance side, on the requirement side for government and for their staff employees, there are training requirements, there's response requirements, there's planning requirements, and we've been able to pick that up and do that, and we're very happy with that. You hit it right on the nail head. There's a difference between what the council wants to do with the community than there is regarding those obligations that we went into a contract with them for, which is their sole responsibility unless they hire someone to do it.
Thanks, Aaron. Anything else? Okay, so now we'll get down to the consent agenda, and I know Peter, I don't know if anyone wants to take anything off of the consent
Well, let me
agenda.
move that we accept the consent agenda.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye. Didn't you say there was one thing that wasn't permitted to be on the consent calendar?
Actually, it's fine.
Okay.
Because there's the sole source thing, but because it's guided by FEMA, it's fine to be on here.
Okay, I apologize. I just wanted clarification.
Yeah,
Okay, now,
yeah. Now they're regulated.
get your pen and pencils handy, folks. The way that the regular agenda is organized, I think, is not particularly constructive in terms of the way our discussions ought to go. We start off with item number 14. And I would suggest that we go from item 14 to what's now currently listed as item 16, which is in fact also part of item 20. So the sequence would be 14, 16 and 20 together, and then 21 and 22 to follow that. And then we would go back 15, 17, 18, 19, 23. So we keep all the Menlo Park M2 land use issues together, starting off with Tim's presentation and a report of the meeting that was held with the city of Menlo Park, and then the proposed actions that are on our agenda. So it's sort of one big agenda item consisting of those pieces. So we go item 14, then 16 and 20, then 21, then 22. And having finished all of those things, then we'd go 15, 17, 18, 19, 23. So I would propose that the agenda be changed to that order.
That's fine with me, and you have to.
So moved.
Second?
Well, wait, there's another change from Stephen Myers, our counsel, because he's had a minor emergency, so
Is he
is
on?
he here? Or he's,
I think.
Stephen, are you on?
No, I have not called him yet.
No, he's
No,
on,
it says ready, so.
yeah, he's item 7.
17.
17, which would be the proposed 7th item. But if we could just move that one to the top, and then if you want to vote on that new order, otherwise it would work. Just so we
So,
can put Steve first on
if
the
he's
front.
standing by to do that,
Right.
rather than pay toll
Yeah.
fees,
yeah.
That's exactly.
So then it would be 17, 14, 16, 20, 21, 22, 15, 18, 23. 19 and 23, yeah, sorry. Okay, so is there a motion to rearrange this? Oh, I'm sorry, okay. Okay, sorry, so all in favor of this new rearrangement of the regular agenda?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay, so can we get Stephen on the
Copyright.
musical agenda?
can somebody get some water,
Yeah.
please?
Yeah, that'd be great.
He's on the stand, he knows.
He knows.
Okay, good.
Yes.
It's fine.
Hi, Stephen.
Steve Myers.
Hi, Steve. Welcome to our fire board meeting.
Thank you, Virginia. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you. So we just approved a rearrangement of the regular agenda. So you are on for item 17, which is your oral report regarding practices and procedures under board rules on board member initiated agenda items.
Thank you, Madam President and board members. Can you hear me well enough?
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
Michelle,
yeah.
can you hear
Go ahead,
that?
Stephen.
So the genesis of this agenda item is the observation that a number of board members are desiring to place items on the agenda under the rules provided in section 7.8 of your rules of procedure. As you all know, the fire chief, in collaboration with the board president and/or vice president, generally prepares the agenda for each regular committee and special meeting of the board of directors. However, the rules specifically provide that a board member can request to place any item on the agenda related to district business through a process that generally involves either voicing the request during an open session of the board meeting, by submitting a request outside the board meeting to the board president or fire chief with a copy to the clerk. Third, by submitting a request outside the board meeting to the fire chief. And fourth, by the board member adding an agenda item directly by submitting a form prescribed by the clerk. This rule allows board members to raise issues that they would like the board to consider and discuss outside the normal agenda process, which involves the preparation of the staff reports, staff analysis, and staff background work. And the way that I have always interpreted this rule that has been actually used more recently than not, and this is consistent with what Michelle Radcliffe, your clerk, your board clerk, has described to me as well. And that is what I would consider a two-step process. The board member first places the matter on the agenda to see if anyone else is interested in discussing it. So, for example, if a board member wants to discuss a particular item of business, he or she first needs to get the concurrence at a regular board meeting with the rest of the board that they're actually interested in taking that matter up. By placing it on the agenda, the board member is putting at issue whether the board wishes to discuss a particular item. You have a number of items on tonight's agenda, and I won't get into the specifics of those. But we have things ranging from land use issues to pension reform and things of that nature. Because there has been no staff report, staff analysis, legal analysis, or if it affects labor relations, no input from your labor negotiator, it's important that we distinguish between those items which we can take action on, or should take action on, and those which need referral back to staff. So the way that we envision this rule working is that the board member places the matter on the agenda and sees if there are 3 votes, cumulatively, a majority of the board or more, who wishes to consider this. If the answer is yes, and the board wishes to consider it, then I think in most instances, we would recommend to you that the matter be referred to the staff for a report, for an analysis, for any facts that are necessary to be produced, for any legal issues to be resolved, for any labor relations issues to be looked at, so that when the matter comes back to you, it is fully fleshed out, legal issues are resolved, policy issues are addressed, facts and circumstances regarding the administration of the fire district are considered. So you have a full agenda packet that will allow you to adequately consider this thing. The problem that I see developing is if we start having these director-added agenda items without fully understanding that there needs to be some background analysis, then we're going to be in a situation where we're bobbing and weaving at board meetings, evaluating legal issues, evaluating policy issues, or labor relations issues, as those issues will arise tonight. And I thought it would be important at this juncture, since we see that more board members want to place items on the agenda, that we have a clear understanding of how this rule is supposed to work. Now, having said that, these are your rules. You've adopted them, you approved them. If you don't like the way the rules work, then we should modify the rules. But in the proper administration of the district's affairs, and based upon the way this rule is written, that's my interpretation of how things should work. Now, one exception to what I've said is those situations where an agenda item is so non-controversial or so simple that it's essentially self-executing. For example, if a board member wanted to place an item on the agenda that would call for the declaration of replace your battery, your smoke detector month, so that does not really require any staff analysis, doesn't require legal analysis, has no labor relations implications, has no overall policy implications, and it would be certainly appropriate for that to be placed on the agenda, and if the majority of the board wanted to approve it that night, they certainly could do that. But I have a feeling that that's going to be the exception to the rule, and that most issues require the investment of manpower, time, money, and the administration of the staff and other resources the district has. But we want to avoid a situation where we're not wasting those resources and items which the majority of the board is not interested in. For example, if there is an issue that has significant labor relations impact and may involve meet and confer, then we have issues that have to be resolved as far as that is concerned. If there are issues that involve some legal analysis, there's no point in district resources on legal analysis unless there's a clear majority of the board that wants to proceed. So what I'm trying to outline to you is staff, mine, and the staff's interpretation of how this should work. And I hope that my explanation and my suggestions to you make sense so that we can use the district's resources in the most efficient way possible, not waste any time or effort, but make sure that we get the items that you're interested in on the agenda in a timely fashion, and you get a response to your request. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have on that.
Peter?
Yeah, I'd just like to provide a little bit of historical perspective, and perhaps Rex can help me on this, but when we first put this procedure into the policy manual, we discussed exactly the issue that Constable is raising here. And the intention of the language, as I recall it, was that any director could in fact put an item on the agenda, but until such time as the board decided there would be no staff time allocated to that issue. And I think that's essentially what Constable is suggesting, is that yes, you put it on the agenda. If it's something that's self-executing, that doesn't require staff time, the agenda is set up in such a way that you in fact, under the Brown Act, have the authority to act on it, which is a very important reason to make sure it's agendized so it permits action. But agendizing something that permits action does not agendize something that requires action. And so when we wrote this language, what we tried to do was to make sure that each elected official had the opportunity to say, here's something that I think that we ought to discuss. It would go on the agenda, and the discussion could be very brief and say, no, we don't want to discuss that. End of item. I'm distressed when I look at other local jurisdictions that don't allow an elected official to put something on the agenda and require 2 or more people on the elected body to do it, because I don't think that's what we were elected for. So the issue here, and here Consul and I are agreeing, that when a single director asks for something to be put on the agenda, then you have 3 possible outcomes. Either it's something that doesn't require staff time, and the board has the ability, if it so wishes, to act on it at that meeting, or the board says, gee, Peter, that's a crazy idea, we're not going to pursue it any further, and it goes away, or the board says, okay, we'd like this to come back with a complete staff report. And then it would go through the process that Consul has described for a complete staff report at a subsequent meeting. Now, Rex, do you remember things differently?
That was the intent.
Yeah. So certainly when I put something on the agenda, my intention is to try to make as clear as possible what I'd like to have happen. But I am always comfortable with the board saying, Peter, that's another one of your crazy ideas, we don't want to spend time on it. Or it may be something that people look at and say, yeah, we should act on that. Or third alternative is legitimate item, let's refer it to the staff and or a committee, and then come back at a subsequent meeting for further discussion.
So I'm just curious, Harold, how did this issue get brought up?
This issue got brought up because we have items going forward, and to Peter's point, and concerns that were brought up from staff regarding these items coming in all the time is how do we handle them? And I think the one big difference that Stephen, I don't know if he's really addressed it, is it's gone from the request to now also we have motions. And so that's a new thing that we hadn't seen before. If the board wants to do that, there is some staff work sometimes with motions because we have to ask legal, are things in here in a motion? Can we even do what is in this motion? So, there is, the request of itself isn't really the issue. That's been there for a while. It's how that gets phrased, and then if there's a motion attached to it. That's where this has become kind of interesting because inadvertently it is creating staff work. Inadvertently it does have to go to legal because it's got to get reviewed to see, is this something that can even be done?
Because it's a motion.
Well,
Sure. But see, I would, as somebody who's in the habit of proposing motions for people to consider, I do that as a courtesy to my colleagues to let them know what I think we might do. I'm never offended if someone says, if you say, hey folks, don't do anything on that until the board decides whether it even wants to entertain the motion that Peter's put on the table. It was never my intention when I write motion language that staff time be spent on it until such time as the board decides that they want to focus on it. My feelings will not be hurt if my colleagues look at what I've written and say, A, we don't want to deal with it at all. Thank you very much, go away. Or B, yes, we would like to have this pursued, but it has to now be given to staff, has to now be given to Consul, and we need to report back on it.
Chuck?
With all due respect, Steve, I understand the interest in having an orderly process and an orderly meeting, but there's something about this staff review that could, or at least raises the specter in my mind of censorship, and I think it's one of the ills of public process these days is that we have a kind of a tyranny of staff, where staff decides what goes on agendas and elected officials don't even get to debate matters of public concern. And I think we may be afraid of nothing right now. I think that this is something, I think your interpretation goes beyond the wording that is in our procedures. You've extended that, and you may be right that that's necessary for the process, for orderly process, but I don't believe that what your interpretation is actually supported by the wording in our policies at this point. And I have felt sometimes that issues need to come before this board, and as Peter says, if people don't want to do them, they'll just shut them down, and that's the end of it. But I think we shouldn't have a fettered process for bringing things forward. I, for one, am very grateful that this is on there. I've been trying to talk about pension, for example, for about 6 months, and I was forced to have it go into private session, or closed session originally. It was very difficult to have the informational meeting we had on pensions at one point, and I just feel that we need to have these kind of discussions. So I'm hoping, I understand your interpretation, but I don't think I don't want to give the staff the ability to censor the items that we discussed as part of the policy-making duties that I have.
Ron?
Yes, I'd like to say something. I think it's very important that as members of this board that we have 1/5 of a voice, and part of that is to bring up items that we want to discuss. And if it's an individual item that a board member wants to bring, so be it. But to restrict the informational part, or to restrict the interaction between the board members, I think is very self-destructive. We need to discuss certain items, and if it is of a reasonable consideration, we'll get a second, go forward and direct staff. And then staff will prepare the necessary documentation. But I think every board member should be able to put something on the agenda, and as Peter said, and Chuck, that there should be a way that if it's either second or not, or this was a really good idea, Rob, but not at this time, or Rob,
Bad idea.
bad idea again, you know. So I think we all need to consider that, and thank you for your interpretation, Stephen.
What I might suggest is that on the agenda, that maybe between the consent agenda and the regular agenda is the proposed agenda items, where the proposed agenda items would simply be listed, and then we would vote on the disposition of the proposed agenda items. But the thing I really want to preserve is the ability of each individual elected official to at least get that discussion before this board, and it doesn't happen on city councils. I mean, I find it
Menlo Park is 2.
Pardon?
I believe Menlo Park is 2, you need 2.
Well, not as only 2, but even when this elected body sent the city of Menlo Park a unanimous resolution, the staff never reported that resolution to the board, to the city council. Never. You know, so it's that kind of, you know, I think that's an appalling dereliction of duty. Now, what's happened here, and I can understand it, is there's a lot more, there's evidently the perception by the staff that they need to do more when they see motion language. Certainly as the author of that garbage, you know, I don't expect anybody to do anything unless my colleagues agree that we should allocate staff time to it. I write the motions for the sole purpose of trying to provide you with some idea of where I'm going. Not because I think that that language has been properly vetted or has been evaluated by the staff or looked at by council. And so maybe, you know, we miscommunicated there between myself and the chief and the management team and council. So my suggestion is between the consent agenda and regular agenda, we have a category proposed agenda topics, and you either vote them up or down. Are we going to put this on a future agenda? Ask the chief to put staff time on it or not?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I mean, because I do
Can
agree.
we do that?
Well, that was my next question. Can we do that now, or does that have to be changed in the policies and procedures?
No, it's just organizing the agenda. It's not doing anything. It's totally consistent with, in my
That's true.
opinion.
It was
Yeah.
consistent with what we already had.
Yeah, that's true.
It's just
because anyone can
organizing it
hit-
so that a regular agenda item will be something in the future that is always accompanied by a staff report.
Right,
If it doesn't have a staff report and it's been proposed by one of us, it goes in the category of proposed agenda items.
yeah.
And then we vote them up or down. And the staff doesn't need to worry about doing anything on that until you get a vote to proceed.
So,
Harold.
point of order.
I mean, interpretation.
Well, no, because I think it's worth saying. So staff has it, you know, just so we're clear, because I don't want anybody to think staff is denying requests going on the agenda. That's
Yeah,
That's not happening. And I understand for the purposes that Director Carpenter's raised. But sometimes when there is a motion, there have been questions from other board members to the legality of the motion, question the motion. And I think what that does with staff, the staff doesn't know, so we have to go through
No.
legal counsel to ask those questions, because the motion then becomes public, and there's concerns about, is this a legal issue? Because that's really happened.
But Chief, I would recommend the response to somebody who asked that question is, we don't know. It'll depend on whether the board asks us to proceed with that. Just because I have a crazy idea doesn't give it any validity.
So if you
And-
put something on just as a potential in that section you're talking about, without a motion, it would just identify that this is something that you want to talk about.
Well, what I try to do is to be clear about what I think we ought to be doing. And one of the problems is that it's very easy to write a one-paragraph sentence and have 5 people look at it and come away with different ideas of what I'm proposing. So that's the only reason why I add additional verbiage, is to try to give you more insight into the direction I'm suggesting we go. But if we have this new category in our agenda, which is proposed items for future meetings, then it's a real simple question. Staff simply says, hey, until the vote of the board, don't spend any time on it. And if Peter makes a fool out of himself by putting something on the agenda, that's his problem. You know, it hasn't been adopted by the board.
so but Harold, so are you saying that if something goes into this middle category and it's inadvertently, like no one really knows on this board the legality of it, and we vote on it, and it's not even legal, and we can't even vote, that's a
That's
problem?
been the question. I mean, factually, that's happened, right? So, you know, a motion was raised, it was by Director Carpenter. The question then was,
Can
when
we
the other
even
board
do
members saw that, correct. Can Director Carpenter even say or do that? Well, then my answer is, I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, so I go ask a lawyer. I understand, don't go ask the lawyer, but I'm not sure, you know, Stephen Myers, if he wants to jump in, agrees with that because we're putting something in the system. So what's in the pipeline, here's probably the way I would make the analogy. What's in the pipeline got bigger than it used to be. You know, there's more,
Beyond a
right,
request.
there's more pieces to it. So now we do feel a little obligated to answer questions and address some of those things. If the board or if legal says, well, don't worry about it, then that's a different thing. But, you know, again, we've been asked, hey, can you do this or can you do that by other board members? And the answer is, I don't know. And this cake hasn't even been baked yet, but, you know, there's some ingredients that people are concerned about in there.
I think what we're proposing here is that there be 0 staff time, other than Michelle's, on putting something in this category called proposed agenda item. And if somebody comes to you and asks, is that legal? And I said, we're not even going to worry about that until we know that the board wants to pursue it. And then and only then will we do a staff report.
I would also like to just suggest that the board consider changing the language in the board policy manual, because this new process is not stated in the board policy.
That's correct.
And, you know, this current board may understand how the process
future
works.
boards
But
may
the
not,
future board,
right.
yes. And so just my suggestion is that language be incorporated into the
And
policy manual.
I think we're scheduled for the May meeting for our annual review of the policy and procedures guide. So that would be a good place for, you know, if the board wishes now to give guidance, given this item on the agenda, to staff to work on new language for our annual review of policy and procedure on this issue, great.
Well, I think that would be a good idea because the policy that you have right now, I essentially read verbatim to you when I was making my opening remarks. That's all it says, other than the fact that the agenda items have to be subject to the requirements of the open meeting laws and within the subject matter jurisdiction of the district. I think the point I want to leave you with is simply that you have rules that are somewhat unique, but very beneficial to individual board members raising issues they're concerned about. And I certainly think that in the administration of good government, that's a great idea to have that policy. But I also am concerned that expectations are not raised unnecessarily about the level of analysis because this is an agenda item before we know whether the board is fully invested in going forward with that issue. This is simply a matter of making sure that your limited resources are used in the most efficient way, and it is not intended to limit or prevent the board from consideration of any issues you think are appropriate within the jurisdiction of the district, or addressing any problems that you think need to be remedied by policy changes or other actions. So I was not present as your counsel when this policy was first adopted, but I do believe that Director Carpenter's summary of it is consistent with my understanding of its origin, and it's certainly consistent with my advice to you this evening. But we can certainly clarify the provisions of 7.8 in your upcoming review of your rules of procedure, and hopefully that will elucidate things and facilitate the discussion in an appropriate way.
Yeah, this is a great example of mission creep. I'm glad we caught it. And let's make sure that we don't waste staff time on things that the majority of the board don't think are appropriate.
So Steve, you keep
Yes.
saying, you keep talking about our limited resources. It sounds like y'all have spent a lot of time. I'm just curious, how much time have you spent on dealing with?
You know, actually, it's not that much.
Okay.
But I think that the term mission creep is a good one because even though it may not be much now, it could involve significantly more. And, you know, if the board wants to use its resources in a particular way, that's the board's discretion, that's the board's judgment, that's the board's decision. But I wanted to make sure that you were alerted to the fact that we are moving towards a situation where there seems to be more and more expectation of analysis and staff work on behalf of your district staff on these agenda items. Just want to raise the issue with you, bring it to your attention, make sure that we all understand what's expected of the staff and what's expected of the board when they raise these new agenda items.
Great, thank you. Chuck, did you have, I didn't know you. Okay, so at least for now,
Thank you,
Bob, sorry. Are we done with Steve?
We are now.
Bye, Steve.
I think you just got rid
So I
Feeling
guess,
bored.
so the direction, I guess, for future agendas is to have that item, that the proposed,
I've added-
requested,
I've
yeah.
got an ongoing list of items.
One other option would be, is that we leave items on, but we change the manual to say that items added by directors shall be treated as proposed agenda items, just as an alternative, instead of adding a new section.
Just keep it open.
Well, it seems to me that we're saying the same thing.
We are, it's just two
Um,
different ways.
I like having it follow the consent calendar because I'm hoping that, let's say there's 5 of them there. It's really not something that I would encourage us to have a lot of discussion about. It's up or down. Okay, got this crazy idea from Peter. Does he have 2 other people who think it's worth spending half time on? Yes or no? And we don't discuss the merits of the proposal.
Right.
We simply discuss the allocation of resources. That's all we discuss. And I think if you merge it with regular agenda items, you would lose that distinction.
Right.
If you put it in a category of proposed agenda items, then you can keep that distinction as, look, we're not here to discuss the substance of this. The question is, do we have, I find it unconscionable that my elected town council member cannot by himself put something on the Atherton town agenda. And that's why we fought so hard to make sure that our policy allowed us to do so. And our policy is also unique in that a citizen can actually propose. One citizen can propose to the fire chief and the president something which they then take under advisement. That's unique, as far as I know, of any government in California. I think that's very important to retain.
Yeah, so I agree, and I do think that for clarity purposes, so that visually we can see this and the staff can see it. I mean, I don't mean to put more work on the staff, but I do think it's important so that the staff can say, oh, well, okay, well, we're not gonna have to deal with
So just for clarity, is this change suggested for the next board meeting
Yeah.
or when the board policy is updated? I guess-
President, yeah, if I could just jump in on that. I think it's important to just reiterate Steve's statement, which is that if you're gonna change the way the board is bringing items to them, you should consider that as part of your May item. So I heard him say, and I would agree, and we're talking about just the March and April meeting, that I wouldn't change how you present your agenda before you
I totally
consider.
disagree. That's an interesting opinion, but the agenda will, we've been through this battle before. The agenda belongs to the board. The agenda is not the fire chief's agenda. The agenda is not the council's agenda. It's the elected official's agenda. And we have one and only one requirement we have to meet, and that's we have to meet the requirements of the Brown Act. And if we want to reorganize our agenda, that is our liberty to do at our leisure. And you don't have to change the policy and procedure manual to change the way in which we put, there's nothing in the policy and procedure manual that talks about this particular order of agenda. This is something that has evolved over time.
Director Carpenter, all we're trying to say, and I'm just reiterating what Steve said, we're not saying that items cannot be brought by individual directors and put on the agenda. But the recommendation from council is that before you add a category that says items to be considered, which by the way, under the Brown Act, would mean, you may be limited in taking sort of actions on that. We recommend that before you change it, not that you can't bring director items, but before you add this new category of items on your agenda, that you take it up as part of your policy and procedures review. You can continue to bring board items in the interim. That's the recommendation, so there isn't an inadvertent thing where you have an item that says item to consider, that constrains you on whether you can act on it or not if you chose to act on it at that meeting. That's all.
You have anything else?
Well, I just disagree with the advice we're receiving, because all we're trying to say is let's organize our meeting in such a way that it makes sense. It doesn't put a burden on the staff. We have managed over the last X number of years to convolute those items which have staff reports and those items which don't. And so we're just simply saying here, thank you for bringing this forward. You've created some confusion by this procedure. Let's clarify it. There's the report items, there's the consent calendar, there's proposed agenda items, and then there's the regular agenda. And I know the policy and procedure manual by heart, and there's absolutely nothing in there which speaks to the structure of our agendas.
Okay, and then the only comment I would make in response to that is if you call it a proposed agenda item under the Brown Act, there's probably limitations on whether you could actually adopt one of those items when you head it that way and you describe it that way.
Even if it's self-executing, perhaps.
That's all.
Well,
That's all.
I would say on that question, I have great confidence that the board president and the fire chief, with the advice of council, can identify those items that should, instead of being proposed agenda items, should go on the regular agenda. But unless proven otherwise, they should be treated as proposed agenda items. But if you look at one and you say, hey, this is self-executing, we're going to put it on the regular agenda, then we're right where we are today. But what we will preserve is staff time on things that have not yet got a majority support from the board.
That would address the potential Brown Act issue.
Okay.
And
So I think that's a good way of doing it.
I have a lot of respect for your discretion, you guys can look at it, get input from Stephen, decide, okay. But by and large, the default will be, if I propose something as a director, it goes into the category proposed agenda items. If it is something that when you look at and say, wait a minute, this is just a declaration in favor of Mother's Day, and let's put it on the regular, that's fine. But the presumption is if it's only proposed by one director, it doesn't take staff time, you don't write a report, and it goes in that new category.
So I'm actually okay with that, because I do think that we have to change this in the policies and procedures to make sure that it's known to future boards too. And I mean, I wish that we could do it right away, but we do have 2 meetings before the May meeting. We could probably even start looking at this at the end of April, so that it's the beginning of May we look at this. But if we move forward, I'm fine with Peter's suggestion in terms of having this proposed category, and if it looks like it shouldn't be proposed, it can be on the regular agenda. But that's just me, and we'll change the policies and procedures in May to reflect the new agenda format.
I might suggest though, not to make this more complicated, but the agenda item for tonight states that we're going to receive an oral report from general counsel. So if we do want to make a motion in a second to change the agenda, the order of the agenda, it still might be appropriate to do that next time, because we didn't.
See, the agenda is not, the order of the agenda is not addressed in the policy and procedure manual.
Right.
So we don't have to take action to do that. It's direction to the chief and to the president and to the board clerk.
Okay, I will agree
This,
with that.
it doesn't have to, that is not, we're not making that, we don't need to make that policy.
That's fine.
It's in the hands of some very talented, capable people. They've heard what we've had to say. I expect the agenda for the next meeting will look different.
Geraldine, we probably should vote on this.
No, from staff's perspective, again, when there's directors-related concerns, which I heard tonight, we're not going to worry about that. We're not going to do anything with that. That's fine with me. Because then we won't call legal counsel, we won't bring items up, there'll be no work done, which, again, as we started to do a little bit of mission creep, there's a concern because the body of what was there was bigger, different than it was before. I'm good if there's no expectation staff do any work. We're right back where we started from.
Right,
We
which
put
is
it on
where
the-
we want it.
Put it on the agenda, you sort them out when we get to the meeting.
Okay, so if there's no vote, then that's just the direction, then Michelle, you've got that down, right?
Just looking at legal
Well,
counsel.
Are you comfortable with that, Tim, with just taking an action and not agendizing it for the next meeting?
You mean what the action is tonight?
Yeah.
We don't have an action.
I think
We're just gonna
it's,
continue with the way we're doing
No,
Yeah,
no,
I
Oh,
think-
no, no, sorry, for the next meeting.
no.
it. Wait,
We've got a different format.
all right.
But which is not,
But
does not
it's
require board
inconsistent,
action.
it's not
Right.
inconsistent with the current board's policies and procedures,
Right.
it's different, yeah. No, I think you got it,
Yeah, I do.
so, but does that work?
We-
I don't know for a legal counsel stuff.
and we obviously want to facilitate what the board would like to do. So I think the best way to interpret what's going on tonight is that there's been a discussion of how the existing policy is played out, then do provide direction to staff. There's been discussion about how that policy, and then for the next 2 meetings before you revisit the policy, we will continue to interpret and enforce the policy that's on the books as was discussed tonight.
Okay,
So there's no change to that, but we will, as we discussed it tonight, then that will be done in the next 2 meetings.
So what you're saying, Tim, is we keep it the same way until we change the board policy manual?
No, what I'm saying is it's fine to put the items, to me, if you have the direction in your rules that provides how this is done, there's been a discussion of how that direction should play out under your existing rules, and that's what we'll do as a staff, interpreting, understanding the discussion tonight. We'll move forward with that. You'll globally revisit the issue in 2 months.
in May, right.
Right.
But
But
in
for
the meantime,
in the meantime,
the
we
format will
understand,
change.
Format.
we understand how the board is interpreting the rule, and we will
In the format.
work.
Because the policy simply says it goes on the agenda.
Correct,
It doesn't say where it goes on the agenda.
correct.
And we're just providing clarification and saying it goes in this we're suggesting a new category. And we're deferring to Michelle and the fire chief and the board president and council to sort out the details.
Yes, and then in May, we'll officially clarify.
We'll see
the
what
policies.
language changes need to be
Yeah,
made
May.
in the policy and procedures guide to make sure that it's clear, as Lauren says, to future boards, what was intended by this. And I think my sense is maybe one sentence or something in there about no staff time shall be spent until there's a majority vote by the board. You know, one sentence addition, but we'll come to that in March, in May.
May, right, okay, so, Michelle, do you have that direction? I guess that's the main thing. Okay, so are we done with this discussion? Because then we can get on to Tim Kremen's presentation at 8:25. Tim, thank you.
You ready? Yeah.
No, I'm fine.
Before, directors, before Tim starts, just to kind of lay the groundwork. So this was based upon a request, obviously, to try and better understand, or the whole purpose behind the presentation, to better understand the board's role, the city's role, the land use issues, development, and so forth. To, give you a little history, because I don't know that everybody has it. Tim was brought on after the Bohannon Gateway project came before us. That wasn't a particularly successful negotiation with Mr. Bohannon and his legal counsel. We were not represented by legal counsel during that process. We probably should have been. So to not necessarily even the playing field, but to bring on an expert, we went through Myers-Nabe, secured Tim, and Tim has basically been working with us since the Bohannon project, what, Tim, 5 years ago? I want to say.
It's been about 4 years that I've been working with that board.
Okay, so, and Tim has dealt with we sent him all the requests for construction and growth within the district, so he's familiar with everything that we've received. And Director Bernstein was impressed with all the different projects that Tim is up to speed with, but that's because we now run those through Tim is the attorney to look at land use issues and so forth, including, he's also been involved with negotiations with the Slack agreement, with the Facebook agreement, and most recently, which will come before you next month, the VA housing project he's been working on.
Before we start the presentation,
Change the
I need to
Change the
a
tape.
5-minute break, so
Okay.
I can change the
What a
tape.
5-minute break.
So then I pump them all up and everybody leaves.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Sorry. Thank you.